Americans should, quote, follow the instructions on the product label to ensure safe and effective use. The company that makes Lysol also felt the need to issue a public statement warning customers to not consume their products. The White House press secretary and the president's factotums in the right-wing media claimed that the press was taking President Trump's comments out of context, which we were not. And then this afternoon, the president made their empty defenses of him even less rooted in fact when he claimed he had been sarcastic and he was posing the questions to journalists, quote, just to see what would happen, unquote, which is not remotely what happened. Simply put, it's a bald-faced lie. The president wasn't even posing the bizarre question about disinfectants to journalists. He was talking to an official of the Department of Homeland Security who had been talking about how sunlight and disinfectants helped to kill the coronavirus when it was in the air and on non-porous surfaces, not when it was in the human body. But don't take it from me. Take a look and listen for yourself.
So I ask Bill a question that probably some of you are thinking of if you're totally into that world, which I find to be very interesting. So supposing we hit the body with a tremendous, whether it's ultraviolet or just very powerful light, and I think you said that hasn't been checked, but you're going to test it. And then I said, supposing you brought the light inside the body, which you can do either through the skin or in some other way. And I think you said you're going to test that too. Sounds interesting.
The right folks who could.
Right, and then I see the disinfectant where it knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning?
What's more important than Lysol Gate itself is what this all suggests about the president's ability to handle this crisis, which has now killed more than 50,000 people in the United States. CNN's Caitlin Collins is there with us now with more on the CDC warning about the health problems that can be caused by using disinfectants the wrong way in the human body.
I was asking a question sarcastically to reporters like you just to see what would happen.
President Trump now says he was just kidding when he wondered aloud if sunlight, UV rays, or household disinfectants could possibly kill the coronavirus inside the body.
No, of course, no. Of course, that was interior-wise. It said sarcastically. It was put in the form of a question to a group of extraordinarily hostile people, namely the fake news media.
Trump made the initial remarks on camera yesterday after a Department of Homeland Security official said they tested how sunlight and disinfectants could kill coronavirus on surfaces and in the air. Trump then mused about whether it could work on people.
Supposing we hit the body with a tremendous, whether it's ultraviolet or just very powerful light, and I think you said that hasn't been checked, but you're going to test it. And then I said, supposing you brought the light inside the body, which you can do either through the skin or in some other way. And I think you said you're going to test that too. Sounds interesting.
The right folks who could.
Right, and then I see the disinfectant where it knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning? Because you see it gets on the lungs and it does a tremendous number of the lungs, so it'd be interesting to check that. So that you're going to have to use medical doctors with, but it sounds interesting to me.
At one point, Trump instructed scientists to look into the matter.
I would like you to speak to the medical doctors to see if there's any way that you can apply light and heat to cure. I'm not a doctor, but I'm like a person that has a good, you know what.
The president's remarks were immediately criticized by doctors across the country, and the company that makes Lysol issued a statement warning consumers not to try it at home. After Trump was angered by media coverage of his remarks, the White House claimed reporters took him out of context, but didn't say he was being sarcastic. At the briefing, the president appeared serious and even asked Dr. Deborah Birx to weigh in.
Deborah, have you ever heard of that, the heat and the light relative to certain viruses, yes, but relative to this virus?
Not as a treatment. I mean, certainly fever
Yeah.
is a good thing when you have a fever. It helps your body respond. But not as I've not seen heat or
I think it's a great thing to look at.
In the last 48 hours, the president has put his own doctors and scientists in uncomfortable positions. On a CNN town hall last night, FDA Commissioner Stephen Hahn hedged when he was asked about the president's comments.
And no, I certainly wouldn't recommend the internal ingestion of a disinfectant.
After Dr. Anthony Fauci said the U.S. needed to ramp up testing, Trump disagreed with him openly at the briefing.
I don't agree with him on that. No, I think we're doing a great job in testing.
The day before, Trump and Fauci were also at odds over whether the coronavirus would reappear this fall.
You may not even have corona coming back.
We will have coronavirus in the fall. I am convinced of that.
That same day, Trump also announced the CDC director would issue a correction for quotes he then affirmed were accurate.
I'm accurately quoted in the Washington Post.
Now, Jake, the president is now saying he was being sarcastic when he made those remarks yesterday, but if you look at the Twitter feeds of some of his own officials and agencies, that doesn't seem to be the case, because you saw the Surgeon General tweet this morning that people should make sure they consult with their doctors before pursuing any treatment. And then this afternoon, the CDC issued a warning saying household cleaners and disinfectants can cause problems when not used properly.
It's ridiculous. Obviously, he was not being sarcastic. Thank you, Caitlin Collins. Appreciate it. Joining me now to discuss the medical issues behind this, Dr. Stephen Ostroff, the former commissioner of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. He's worked under both President Obama and President Trump. Doctor, I want to focus mainly on where we go from here in terms of the pandemic, but I do want to get reaction when you heard the president openly suggesting injecting disinfectant as a possible treatment for coronavirus for the Department of Human Services and the doctors to look into. What was your response when you heard that?
Well, I think that's, for anyone that's listening, it's very, very important to say that that is a dangerous thing to do. And nobody should be using disinfectants with the idea that somehow they are therapeutic. And so, if you think about it, there is no basis to either inject one of these disinfectants or to inject bleach, to inhale it, to think that it may do something in your lungs, or to drink it. All of those can be very, very dangerous. And so none of that should be attempted as a way to deal with coronavirus infections. I think one thing that's interesting is that just by coincidence, yesterday, the CDC, my former colleagues at CDC, issued a report looking at calls to poison control centers over the last couple of months related to bleach and disinfectants. And one of the things that was noted is that the number of calls being received is considerably higher than it was at the same time period a year ago. And that was before these announcements yesterday, showing that there are already a lot of people that are using these types of disinfectants to try to clean their homes or maybe to add them to hand sanitizers, etc. And it just shows you that there are dangers even using them in that way. And so the idea that you would inhale or ingest or inject these really makes no sense and can be definitely dangerous.
As a doctor watching this, as the former head of the FDA under Obama and Trump, what do you think when you see people like Dr. Fauci, Dr. Birx, Dr. Redfield, people of medical expertise having to dance around or avoid these bizarre statements from President Trump? First, that the pandemic was no big deal, comparing it to the flu, then talking up medical cures that had been unproven, and now this. Did you encounter that when you were head of the FDA under him? Or under President Obama?
Well, two things to mention. One is not only did I work at the FDA, but I also worked at the CDC for many, many years. And one of the areas that I worked in both locations was emerging infectious diseases. So we've had any number of events, maybe not of this magnitude or this consequence, but many events over the years with emerging infectious diseases. And one of the things that I can say is, regardless of which ones they were, there are always political dimensions to these types of emerging infectious disease situations. If you think back, for instance, one of them that I was involved in quite heavily was the anthrax attacks back in the early 2000s. And some of those anthrax-laced letters actually were delivered to members of Congress. And so there's always politics that comes into play. But one of the important things, and I think one of the things that all of the scientists and all of the doctors involved are trying to do is make sure that we stick as closely as we possibly can to the evidence, and that we try to practice evidence-based medicine when dealing with a situation like this.
You wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal with former FDA Commissioner Gottlieb. You said, quote, "The threat from COVID-19 won't end when the epidemic subsides. The recent upsurge in cases in Singapore and Japan shows how easily the virus can reemerge. It will be a constant threat until an effective vaccine is on the market." So what do we as a society need to do, Doctor, to begin to responsibly facilitate some reopening of the country?
Well, we're in the middle of a wave. It appears in some areas that we're at the peak of the wave, and others we may be now on the downside of that wave. Others are still going up. It's very important when we make decisions about what to do that we base them on data and we base them on evidence. There are clear criteria that have been set up, that have been established about when it's time to start easing back on the stay-at-home orders and some of the other social distancing measures. And I think that in order to have the best outcomes, we need to stick to those. I mean, realizing that the societal implications, the economic implications of this outbreak, the consequences are nothing like we have seen in the world for almost 100 years. And so there's incredible pressure to try to get through this. But we are dealing with a situation where you have to balance those pressures upon trying to get out and stay ahead of what the virus is doing. And if you start easing back on these measures too quickly, there is definitely the possibility that there will be a rebound, and it'll just take longer to start easing back on some of these measures.
Yeah. Dr. Stephen Ostroff, thank you so much. We appreciate your time, sir. You can now go to the gym or a bowling alley in Georgia, and it's not the only state starting to reopen. We're going to talk to Dr. Sanjay Gupta about that and the president's recent claims next. Plus, breaking news about the commander of the USS Theodore Roosevelt, one top official now pushing for his reinstatement. Stay with us.
The Lead with Jake Tapper, brought to you by Tractor Supply Company, providing pet food, animal feed, and gardening supplies.
Out here, it goes without saying, you take